My name is Sarah, and at 30 years old, I've built a life in Atlanta's tech scene as a marketing coordinator. My coworkers know me as the meticulous one, the woman who checks every email 3 times, the one who stays behind after hours to polish campaigns until they gleam. To most people, that probably looks like ambition. But to me, it's survival. It's the product of a lifetime spent trying to prove I was enough. Growing up in a modest suburb outside Atlanta, our house was not a home. It was a stage. And Lauren, my stepsister, was always the star. I was the middle child, my mom's second daughter, quiet, awkward, the one people overlooked. Lauren was 4 years older, with curls so perfect they looked sculpted and a smile that could make strangers adore her. She had been born into the role of princess, and my stepdad, her father, made sure she kept that crown polished. When I was 12, I asked if I could try out for choir. I still remember the hopeful flutter in my chest as I told my mom. She didn't even glance up from folding laundry. "That's a waste of money, Sarah. Lauren's got her dance classes already. We can't do everything." Lauren had waltzed in at that moment, twirling in a sparkly practice outfit, and my mom's face lit up like it was Christmas morning. That was the rhythm of my childhood. My request dismissed, Lauren's whims celebrated. There were moments when the cruelty wasn't just neglect, it was sharp, deliberate. In 9th grade, I had a quiet crush on a boy named Jake, the kind who kept his head down in class but had a soft smile that made my stomach knot. I never told anyone, not even my closest friend. But one day Lauren leaned across the dinner table, her voice dripping mock sweetness. "So, Sarah, you like Jake, huh?" My fork froze midair. I couldn't breathe. "Don't look so shocked. You doodle his name all over your notebook. Kind of pathetic, really." 2 weeks later, Lauren was walking down the school hallway, her manicured hand tucked into Jake's arm. She made sure to laugh loudly, flicking her eyes toward me every few steps. At first, Jake looked embarrassed, like maybe he didn't know what game he'd been dragged into. But by the end of that week, he was grinning at her the same way I used to dream he'd smile at me. I told myself it was just teenage drama, that these things passed. But Lauren's smirk told me it wasn't about Jake, it was about power. That wasn't even her worst strike. I kept a journal back then, a cheap spiral notebook with a blue cover where I wrote everything, dreams, secrets, the feeling of being invisible. It was the one safe place I had, until it wasn't. One afternoon, whispers followed me into school like smoke. Kids giggled behind their hands, eyes darting my way. My best friend wouldn't meet my gaze. Then I heard it, my words, my private thoughts about feeling small, about wishing I could just disappear. Lauren had stolen my journal and read it to her friends, turning my pain into a performance. That night, I sat cross-legged on my bed, staring at the shredded remains of my notebook. I had torn it apart myself, unable to bear the thought of anyone else reading it. My mom came in, saw the scraps, and sighed like I was being dramatic. "Lauren's just teasing. Don't be so sensitive." Teasing. That was the word they always used, as if Lauren's deliberate cruelty was harmless fun. I bit my tongue until it nearly bled, because what else could I do? If I protested, I was jealous. If I cried, I was weak. So I learned to shrink. But shrinking has a cost. By high school, I started holding myself back in ways I didn't even realize. When I earned top grades, I would hide them, afraid my stepdad would scowl and say, "Don't rub it in, Sarah. Let Lauren shine." When I sang alone in my room, I did it softly, almost a whisper, so no one could accuse me of wanting attention. Every year, Lauren's spotlight grew brighter, while mine flickered dimmer. One memory still burns. I had just come home with a history exam, 100% scrawled across the top. My teacher had written, "Brilliant work." For a moment, I felt like maybe I mattered. I held that paper out like an offering. "Mom, look, She cut me off with a sharp sigh. "Sarah, don't brag. It's not cute. People won't like you if you act like you're better than your sister." My stepdad didn't even glance up from his newspaper. "She's right. Don't push it." I slipped the paper back into my folder, face burning, and swore to myself that I'd stop reaching for their approval. Years later, I'd come to realize that silence, that habit of swallowing my victories and my pain, would follow me everywhere. Even into adulthood, even into the day Lauren decided to sabotage the most important moment of my life. But back then, in that house where every corner smelled like Lauren's perfume and every picture frame displayed her smile, I just thought it was my fate, that I would always be second best, that I would always be too plain, too quiet, too forgettable. Sometimes late at night, I'd stare at the ceiling and whisper questions no one answered. Why wasn't I enough? What did I do wrong? My chest would ache with the silence. And somewhere down the hall, I could hear Lauren's laughter, ringing like victory. I didn't know then how much those nights were shaping me, how the quiet child in the shadows would one day stand at the center of her own storm, how the pain of being unseen would drive me to fight harder and sharper than anyone expected. But for now, I was just Sarah, the invisible daughter, learning to survive in a family where love was rationed, and I was always last in line. By the time I reached my teenage years, Lauren's reign in our family had evolved from unspoken favoritism into something more pointed, almost like a game she enjoyed playing. If I had a small spark of joy, she seemed determined to snuff it out. If I earned even the faintest scrap of attention, she found a way to turn the spotlight back to herself. I wasn't oblivious. I noticed patterns. When I was 15, I begged my mom to let me join the art club after school. Drawing was the one thing that calmed me, the one thing I thought might be mine. She didn't even hesitate. No, Sarah, we're not wasting money on that. Lauren's pageant coaching is expensive enough. I remember standing there with my sketchbook pressed to my chest, hearing the finality in her voice. My mom didn't even look at me. She was flipping through one of Lauren's sparkly costumes, checking for loose sequins. Lauren peeked around the corner, smirking. Art club? That's cute. But let's be real, Sarah. What would you even draw? Sad little doodles about how invisible you are? She tossed her hair, and my stepdad chuckled like she'd told a harmless joke. But I saw the glint in her eyes. She wanted me to hear it, to feel the sting. And I did. Even when I stopped asking for things, she found new ways to remind me I didn't measure up. One semester, I worked relentlessly, staying up late, studying under the warm yellow glow of my desk lamp, determined to prove myself. I ended up with the highest score in the entire class on a history exam. My teacher pulled me aside and said, "Sarah, you're going to do great things if you keep this up." That praise carried me home like a shield. But when I showed my mom, holding out the paper as if it was something precious, she frowned. "Sarah, don't brag. It's not cute. You don't want people thinking you're better than Lauren." My stepdad didn't even glance away from his TV. "She's right. You're not doing yourself any favors." I felt the pride drain out of me, leaving only that familiar, hollow ache. That night, I sat in my room and made a decision that haunts me to this day. I'd stop trying. I wouldn't let myself shine, because in our house, my light only made their glares sharper. I began letting small things slide on purpose, missing questions on tests, keeping my head down in class. Betraying myself felt safer than enduring their disappointment. Lauren didn't just bask in their attention, she wielded it. She had learned early that our parents would defend her no matter what, and she used it like a weapon. By the time we were both in high school, her cruelty was calculated. If I made a friend, somehow she'd charm them away. If I showed interest in a boy, she swooped in with effortless confidence, flashing her smile, brushing her hand against his arm, leaving me standing in the shadows. There was one night I'll never forget. A Friday football game. I had finally convinced a classmate, Melissa, to sit with me in the bleachers. We laughed about the marching band, shared a soda, and for a fleeting moment, I felt almost normal. Then Lauren appeared, flanked by two of her pageant friends, their hair curled to perfection. She leaned down, her voice syrupy sweet. "Melissa, didn't know you hung out with Sarah. You should sit with us." Melissa glanced at me apologetically, but she went. Everyone always went. I sat there alone, watching Lauren hold court in the crowd, my throat burning with unshed tears. Later that night, I asked her why she did it. She shrugged. "People want to be around me, not my fault." Then she added, her smile sharp, "Maybe if you weren't so boring, they'd want you too." Each betrayal stacked upon the last, heavy bricks in a wall between us. But the cruelest part wasn't her. It was that my parents either ignored it or excused it. Once I tried telling my mom that Lauren had stolen my friend, spreading rumors to make sure no one wanted to sit with me at lunch. My mom barely looked up from her phone. "Oh, Sarah, stop being so dramatic. Lauren's just more outgoing. You should be happy for her. Happy for her. That phrase became a twisted mantra in our household. Lauren won another crown at a beauty pageant? Be happy for her. Lauren got a brand deal from some local boutique. Be happy for her. Lauren was dating the boy I liked. Be happy for her. My happiness wasn't just overlooked, it was forbidden. By the time I was 17, the message was clear. Lauren was the one who mattered. I was the backdrop, the filler, the other daughter. And yet, beneath the numbness, anger simmered. Quiet anger, the kind you don't show because you know no one will listen. I remember lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, imagining a day when I'd walk away and never come back. But even as I dreamed of escape, guilt gnawed at me, because there was always this little voice whispering, "What if they're right? What if you really aren't enough?" It was during those nights that my habit of perfectionism was born. At school, away from Lauren, I pushed myself harder than anyone. I joined every project, volunteered for every task, because at least there, my work was noticed. I didn't realize it at the time, but I was building the foundation for the career that would one day save me. Marketing wasn't just a job, it was my rebellion, my proof that I wasn't as small as they said I was. Still, home remained a battlefield. Lauren once spilled soda accidentally on my completed science project the night before it was due. I had worked on it for weeks. I remember staring at the sticky mess, trying to breathe, trying not to cry. She just smiled. "Oops, guess you'll have to redo it. Hope you don't fail." When I confronted her, she arched a brow. "Why are you so paranoid, Sarah? It was an accident." Of course, my parents believed her. They always did. Sometimes I wondered if Lauren even loved me in her own warped way, or if I was simply her lifelong target practice. But then she'd flash that victorious grin, and I knew she enjoyed it. My pain gave her power. By graduation, I had stopped fighting back altogether. I'd also stopped hoping. I didn't bother inviting friends to my party because I knew Lauren would steal them. I didn't bother asking my parents for help with college applications because I knew the answer already. Instead, I quietly planned my escape. I thought leaving would free me, but I didn't realize then how deeply those years had carved themselves into me. That even after I built a life on my own, Lauren's shadow would find ways to stretch across it. And as I sat in my room that summer night, staring at the acceptance letter I'd secretly applied for but knew I couldn't afford, I whispered a silent promise. One day, I'll get out. One day, I'll prove I'm not just the quiet child in the background. I'll prove I was worth something all along. What I didn't know was that the path out would be paved with its own betrayals, betrayals that would make even Lauren's games look small. The summer after high school should have been a season of excitement, of planning for the future. For me, it was just another reminder of the invisible line drawn between Lauren and me. She was showered with gifts for her college move-in, new laptop, endless outfits, even a car with a shiny red bow tied across the hood. I remember standing on the driveway that morning, watching her drive away with my parents waving proudly behind her, their faces glowing like she was the first woman ever to go to college. I stood off to the side, clutching my worn-out backpack, my acceptance letter to Georgia State folded inside like a secret. They hadn't even asked about it. My stepdad's voice from weeks earlier still rang in my ears. "College? We're not made of money. You'll figure it out." My mom had nodded, distracted, scrolling on her phone. I didn't press further. What was the point? But fate, or maybe kindness disguised as fate, stepped in through my history teacher, Mrs. Hayes. She was the one who noticed I hadn't filled out scholarship forms or even talked about college openly. She called me after class one day. "Sarah," she said gently, "you have too much potential to let it go to waste. What's going on?" When I told her the truth, that my family wouldn't support me, her expression shifted from sympathy to determination. "Then we'll find another way." She connected me with a local tech firm looking for an entry-level assistant. It wasn't college, but it was a start. I interviewed in a trembling suit, borrowed from a friend's older sister, and somehow I landed the job. That first paycheck was a revelation. For the first time, I had money that was mine. I rented a tiny apartment in Midtown Atlanta, the kind where you could hear your neighbor sneeze through the walls and the pipes rattled every time you turned on the shower. But it was mine. I remember sitting on the floor that first night, eating instant noodles straight from the pot, grinning through tears because no one could take that freedom away from me. At work, I was a nobody, just the assistant who fetched coffee, made copies, scheduled meetings, but I poured myself into every task. My boss noticed. "You're sharp," he told me once after I caught a typo in a client proposal. "You've got an eye for detail." That small sentence lit a fire in me. Slowly, I started moving up, learning marketing strategies, taking on more responsibility. Still, the distance from my family wasn't easy. There were nights when I scrolled through Lauren's Instagram, watching her parade through sorority parties and photo shoots, her smile dazzling as ever. Each picture felt like a reminder of what I wasn't. My chest would tighten, and sometimes, shamefully, I'd whisper aloud, "Do they even miss me?" But the answer was always silence. Phone calls from my mom became rare, then non-existent. My stepdad never reached out. When they did appear, it was usually tied to Lauren. "We're all going to see Lauren compete in another pageant. Wish you could come." Or, "Lauren's working with a brand now. Isn't that exciting?" They never asked about my job, my apartment, my life. I tried not to let it crush me, but late at night, staring at the ceiling of my cramped studio, the ache of abandonment was sharp. One winter, I ran into Lauren at a shopping mall. I hadn't planned it. I was leaving after buying a clearance winter coat, and she was stepping out of a boutique, her arms loaded with bags. She spotted me before I could slip away. "Sarah?" Her tone was surprised, not warm. She glanced at my coat, at the cheap plastic bag in my hand, and smirked. "Still, doing your little office job?" I clenched my jaw. "It's more than a little job. I'm moving up." She tilted her head, pretending to think. Cute. Well, maybe one day you'll get to wear something better than bargain bin clothes." She laughed, her bracelets jingling, and walked away, her heels clicking like applause. That night, I sat on my bed, fists balled. For the first time, anger burned hotter than hurt. I whispered to myself, "I will make something of myself, with or without them." That vow became my anchor. Over the next few years, I clawed my way up the ladder. Assistant turned into coordinator. Coordinator turned into lead on smaller campaigns. I stayed late, studied marketing blogs, and saved every dime I could. While Lauren flaunted her glamorous image online, I was building something real, even if no one in my family cared. But independence had a lonely edge. Holidays were the worst. Thanksgiving dinners were just me with takeout on the couch, watching other people's families laugh on TV. Christmas mornings were quiet, no gifts under the tree except the ones I bought myself. I told coworkers I didn't mind, that I liked the peace, but inside there was a small, stubborn part of me that still wished for a phone call, an invitation, something. Then came the night that shifted everything. I was at a networking event, one of those crowded, buzzing hotel ballrooms where everyone shakes hands too hard and tosses business cards like confetti. I almost didn't go. I hated being the awkward one on the edge of the room. But that's where I met George. He wasn't like the others, slick with rehearsed pitches. He had a quiet confidence, the kind that made me breathe easier. We started talking about work, then about Atlanta, then about everything else. By the end of the night, I realized I hadn't checked the clock once. When he asked if I wanted to grab coffee sometime, I said yes, before doubt could creep in. Coffee turned into dinner. Dinner turned into weekends spent exploring the city. He teased me about my obsession with sweet tea, listened when I rambled about marketing strategies, and looked at me like I was more than enough, like I'd always been enough. For the first time, I felt seen in a way my family never allowed. But even with George, the shadows of my past lingered. When he asked about my family, I deflected. "We're complicated," I'd say, forcing a smile. He didn't push, but I could see the questions in his eyes. And deep down, I knew those shadows weren't done with me yet. Because families like mine don't just fade into the background, they find ways to pull you back in. And Lauren, she was far from finished with me. Falling in love with George was like stepping into sunlight after years of living in shadow. He wasn't flashy, not the type to command a room with arrogance like Lauren or William would later do. Instead, his confidence was quieter, steadier, the kind that made you feel safe just by standing next to him. We met at that networking event, but it didn't take long before coffee dates turned into dinners, and dinners into weekends spent walking through Piedmont Park or cooking together in his apartment. I remember one night in particular, we were sitting on his small balcony, the city buzzing below us, when he turned to me and said, "Sarah, I don't know why, but when I'm with you, everything feels real, like I can finally breathe. For someone who had spent her life being overlooked, those words were like water to a parched soul. George wasn't just kind, he was intentional. He paid attention. If I mentioned liking a certain type of tea, it would show up in his kitchen the next week. If I sighed after a long day, he'd show up at my door with takeout and a grin. And yet the more he loved me, the more nervous I became, because sooner or later he would ask about my family. It happened one evening over dinner at his place. He was stirring pasta sauce, the rich smell filling the air, when he asked casually, "So, when do I get to meet your family?" I froze, the fork in my hand suddenly heavy. "They're complicated." He turned, brows raised. "Complicated how?" I forced a smile. "Let's just say they're not exactly like yours." Because his family was the opposite of mine. I met them a few months into our relationship, and it was like stepping into another world. His parents lived in a warm, inviting house in Buckhead, walls lined with family photos that radiated love. His mother hugged me like she'd been waiting for me all along. "Sarah, you make George so happy," she said, her eyes kind and earnest. His father, a respected businessman, shook my hand firmly. "Welcome to the family," he said, clapping George on the back. "You've got good taste, son." I almost cried right there, but then his dad added, "We'd love to meet your family too, Sarah. Bring them over sometime." Panic bloomed in my chest. I laughed weakly, murmuring something vague about timing. Inside, though, I was spiraling. How could I explain to these generous, open-hearted people that my family had never embraced me the same way? That if they met my mom, my stepdad, and Lauren, they'd see a version of me I didn't want them to see. The invisible daughter, the overlooked one, the second best. Later that night, George noticed my silence. We were sitting in his car, the engine idling softly, when he reached over and squeezed my hand. "Hey, you don't have to tell me everything now, but just know, whatever it is, I can handle it. We can handle it." His words should have eased me, but instead they stirred something else, fear. Because deep down, I knew my family wasn't finished with me. They never really were. The proposal came a year later, on a quiet evening near the Chattahoochee River. The sun was setting, painting the sky with streaks of pink and orange. George knelt on one knee, holding my shaking hands. "Sarah, it's you. It's always been you," he said, his voice steady, his eyes full of certainty. Tears blurred my vision as I whispered, "Yes." In that moment, all the years of being unseen seemed to fade. For once, I felt chosen. We celebrated with his family, who embraced me like their own. His mother clasped my hands, her smile radiant. "Oh, Sarah, this is wonderful. You'll be our daughter now." His father poured champagne, toasting to our future. The room was filled with laughter and warmth, a stark contrast to the cold dinners of my childhood. But beneath the joy, dread lingered, because I knew I had to tell my family. The day I drove to my mom's house, my chest was tight with hope and fear. The Atlanta suburbs hummed with cicadas, the air thick with summer heat. I pulled into the driveway and saw the familiar sight. My mom in the kitchen stirring barbecue ribs, Lauren's favorite dish, of course, while my stepdad scrolled through his phone in the living room. Lauren herself was sprawled on the couch, eyes glued to her screen. I took a deep breath. "I'm engaged," I said, my voice trembling but clear. "George's family wants to meet you." My mom barely glanced up. "Sounds like a lot of work," she muttered, wiping her hands on a towel. Lauren snorted without looking away from her phone. "What? To your little office guy? Pass." My stepdad finally grunted, eyes still on the TV. "Congrats, I guess." I stood there, the silence heavy, my heart pounding. I tried again. "We're hosting a dinner at Porter's Steakhouse, my treat. It would mean a lot if you came." At the mention of Porter's, Lauren's head snapped up. "The one with the truffle fries? I'm in." My parents exchanged a glance, and my stepdad shrugged. "If Lauren's going, we'll come." The shame burned hot in my chest. They weren't coming for me. They were coming for the food, for Lauren. I walked out of that house with a smile plastered on my face, but inside, I was splintering. That night, George noticed my silence again. We were lying in bed, the ceiling fan whirring softly above us. He pulled me close. "Sarah, what happened?" I whispered into the darkness. "I feel like I have to bribe my family just to show up." He kissed my forehead. "Then let them. We'll show them what real love looks like." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe love could cover all the cracks in my past. But deep down, I sensed something else. My family wasn't just uninterested, they were dangerous, because Lauren wasn't the type to let me have even one moment in the sun. And soon she would prove it. Porter's Steakhouse was the kind of place where every detail whispered wealth. The low amber lighting, the polished mahogany tables, the waiters in crisp white shirts gliding silently between booths. George had picked it carefully, wanting to create a setting where his parents could meet mine without distraction. But as we waited at the table, his hand gently resting over mine, I couldn't shake the dread curling in my stomach. When my family finally arrived, they didn't walk in like guests eager to celebrate. They sauntered in like critics ready to judge. My mother's eyes darted over the chandeliers, her lips pressed tight with a satisfaction she didn't bother to hide. My stepdad muttered something about finally some real food as he slid into the seat. Lauren trailed behind, already snapping selfies with her phone, pursing her lips just so. George's parents stood to greet them warmly. His mother extended her hand. "We're so glad you could join us. I've heard so much about you." My mom gave a tight smile, barely touching her hand. "We almost didn't come. Busy schedule. But Porter's is worth the trip." I saw George's mom hesitate, her smile faltering before she quickly recovered. She sat back down, grace unbroken. My chest ached at the sting of embarrassment, but it was only the beginning. As menus were passed around, George's father tried to make conversation. "So, Sarah tells us you work in real estate. That must keep you busy." My stepdad grunted, eyes glued to the appetizers. "Yeah, market's up and down. You know how it is." He didn't ask a single question back. Lauren, meanwhile, was posting a video of the steakhouse interior, adding sparkly filters while George's mom tried gently, "And Lauren, what are you studying these days?" Lauren laughed, flipping her hair. "Studying? No. I'm building my brand. Social media. My last post got 12,000 likes." She held her phone up, showing off the picture of her in a sequined dress. "Impressive," George's mom said softly, though her glance toward me was sympathetic. The tension grew heavier with each course. George's parents asked about my job, how I had worked my way up from assistant to coordinator. I felt a flutter of pride telling the story, but before I could finish, my stepdad interrupted. "Oh, don't let her fool you. Lauren's the real star. She's the one everyone talks about." Lauren smirked, leaning back in her chair, as if the crown had been officially placed on her head again. George squeezed my hand under the table, grounding me, but my throat was tight with humiliation. The entrees arrived, perfectly seared steaks and truffle fries, but instead of gratitude, my parents dove in like kids at a buffet. Compliments flew, not at George's family, not at the evening, but at the food. "Best mashed potatoes I've ever had," my stepdad mumbled with his mouth full. My mom nodded, already reaching for another roll. George's mother tried again. "So, Sarah mentioned you're all close. You must be so excited about her wedding plans." My mom waved a hand dismissively. "Oh, well, Lauren's got a big event coming up. That's what we're focused on." The words landed like knives. Silence rippled across the table. Even Lauren glanced up from her phone, smirking at the wreckage her presence caused without even lifting a finger. George's father set his fork down, his jaw tightening. For a moment, I thought he might actually call them out right there. But instead, he turned to George and me with deliberate warmth. "Well, we're excited for your future. Marriage is about building something real together, isn't it?" His eyes softened as he looked at me. I nodded, swallowing back the lump in my throat. When dessert came, my family barely touched it. They stood abruptly, muttering excuses. My stepdad checked his watch. "We should get going. Long drive." My mom adjusted her purse strap. Lauren blew an air kiss at the table. "Cute dinner. Thanks, sis." Then they left, just like that. The door swung shut behind them, leaving me frozen in my chair, cheeks burning. My chest ached with shame, but also with something else, rage. George's mother reached across the table and touched my arm gently. Her voice was low, steady. "Sarah, you're not them. You're family now." Her words wrapped around me like a lifeline, but still, the hurt lingered long after the plates were cleared. That night in the car, George broke the silence. "Sarah, I need to ask, why do they treat you like that?" I stared out the window, the city lights blurring through my tears. Because to them, I've never been enough. Lauren was always the star. I was extra, a shadow. He pulled over suddenly, putting the car in park. He turned to me, fire in his eyes. "You listen to me. You are not a shadow. You are the strongest, smartest, most beautiful woman I've ever met. And I don't care what they think. They don't get to define you anymore. I wanted to believe him. His certainty was a balm, but it didn't erase the ache of decades of being dismissed. Still, as he held me that night, whispering promises of a future that was ours alone, I felt the faint stirrings of hope. But just when I thought I could keep my family at a distance, Lauren pulled me back in. A few days later, my phone buzzed. I almost didn't answer. It was her, of all people. Her voice was syrupy sweet. Hey, sis, I'm engaged too. Thought you should meet my fiancé, William. Come by Mom's place this weekend. I froze. She had never invited me to anything, not unless it benefited her. My first instinct was to say no, to protect the fragile peace I'd built. But George, ever the optimist, said softly, Go, maybe it's a chance to clear the air. I nodded, though unease coiled in my gut. I didn't know it yet, but Lauren's fiancé wasn't just another chapter in her spotlight. He would be the spark to ignite a full-blown war. When I pulled into my mother's driveway that Saturday, the unease in my chest felt like a warning I couldn't quite decipher. The house looked the same, white paint peeling on the shutters, a sagging porch swing, but there was a different energy, something sharper in the air. I stepped inside, and there he was, William, Lauren's fiancé. He stood in the middle of the living room, perfectly pressed designer suit, watch gleaming, hair slicked back with just enough shine to suggest hours of careful styling. He looked me up and down as though I were an item on a clearance rack. His smirk came quickly. So, you're Sarah, the office girl. I stiffened. I work in marketing. Right. Marketing. High school grad, wasn't it? His smirk widened. No wonder you're keeping it low-key. My stomach twisted. I wanted to correct him, wanted to remind him that I had pushed myself through classes, earned promotions, carved out a career from nothing. But his tone made it clear he wasn't asking. He wasn't interested. Lauren swept into the room, tossing her hair with the kind of theatrical flair that made me wonder if she practiced in the mirror. William, don't be so hard on her. She's sensitive. I clenched my fists at my sides. Sensitive, or just tired of being mocked in my own family's house? Lauren ignored the jab, her smile sharp. Anyway, I have some exciting news. She clasped William's hand and beamed. We've set the date for our wedding. Something in my chest stirred uneasily. That's great. When? She paused, just long enough to savor the moment. The same day as yours. The words slammed into me. Excuse me? William chuckled, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Well, obviously, everyone's going to want to come to ours. We've booked the Grand Regency, Atlanta's top venue, black tie, champagne fountains, the works. Yours is, what again? A barn? My pulse roared in my ears. You planned your wedding on my date, on purpose? Lauren tilted her head innocently. Dates book up fast. What was I supposed to do? Besides, Sarah, let's be honest. Our family will want to be at mine. It's bigger, it's better. Yours is cute, intimate. She smiled sweetly. No hard feelings, right? I felt the old ache rising, the ache of being dismissed, overshadowed, erased. But beneath it was something else, fire. George's voice echoed in my memory from nights before. You are not a shadow. I straightened, my voice shaking but clear. You can try to steal the spotlight, Lauren, but this time you won't win. Her smile faltered, just for a second. Then she leaned close, whispering so only I could hear. You've never won, Sarah, and you never will. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't just sibling rivalry anymore. This was war. When I told George later that night, pacing our small apartment like a caged animal, his jaw tightened. She did what? She set her wedding for the same day. Same day, George. She wants to erase me. She's always wanted that. He grabbed my hands, pulling me to stillness. His eyes burned with conviction. Then we don't let her. Your family won't show up. Fine. Let's build a wedding so full of love, so alive, that it drowns out all her noise. We'll make it ours. And no one will forget it. Something in me cracked open at his words. For years, I had let Lauren dictate who I was, how small I could be. But now, with George's fire igniting mine, I felt something new. Defiance. The weeks that followed were a blur of planning, expanding, dreaming bigger. What had been a small barn celebration turned into something magnificent. Friends from work offered to help. Colleagues spread the word. George's extended family RSVP'd in droves. The barn strung with fairy lights began to glow brighter in my imagination. not just as a venue, but as a declaration. Still, at night, fear gnawed at me. What if no one came? What if Lauren was right and my wedding was overshadowed, ignored, forgotten? One evening, as I folded invitation envelopes, George came behind me, wrapping his arms around my shoulders. "You're shaking," he whispered. "I'm scared," I admitted. "What if she ruins it? What if everyone chooses her?" He turned me gently to face him. "Sarah, look at me. I don't care if it's 5 people or 500. At the end of that day, you'll be my wife. That's the only victory that matters." Tears burned my eyes. I want to believe that. "Then believe it," he said firmly, "because I already do." And so, while Lauren boasted about champagne fountains and black tie glamour, George and I poured ourselves into creating a celebration that was real, heartfelt, ours. Every string light, every table centerpiece, every detail became a small rebellion against the years of being invisible. But in the back of my mind, I knew Lauren wasn't finished. People like her didn't just compete, they conquered. I could almost hear her voice, dripping with confidence. "You've never won, Sarah, and you never will." She thought she had already claimed victory. What she didn't know was that this time, I wasn't the same quiet girl she grew up with. This time, I wasn't alone. The battle of the brides had begun. The weeks leading up to my wedding felt like walking a tightrope over fire. Every decision, every detail mattered, not just because I wanted a beautiful day, but because it had become a silent contest with Lauren. She had her luxury venue, her champagne fountains, her endless guest list. I had a barn strung with fairy lights and a determination that burned hotter than my fear. George and I poured everything we had into our day. Friends from work pitched in with decorations. Colleagues from the tech firm offered connections for catering and music. George's cousins brought crates of wildflowers from their farm. The barn slowly transformed from a simple rustic space into something magical, golden light shimmering off the beams, soft music floating through the air. One evening, as we stood in the middle of the barn, the air filled with the scent of fresh hay and blossoms, George wrapped an arm around my waist. "Look at this," he whispered. "This isn't just a wedding, it's a homecoming. Your day, your moment." I smiled, but the unease lingered. What if no one comes? What if everyone chooses her? He turned me to face him, his eyes steady. "Sarah, people know who you are. They know your heart. The ones who matter will come. And if some don't, then good riddance." His confidence was contagious, but when I was alone, I still felt the tremors of old wounds. Nights were the hardest. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, remembering years of being left behind, overshadowed. Lauren's words whispered through my head. "You've never won, Sarah, and you never will." The invitations went out. George's extended family responded quickly, warm and enthusiastic. "We wouldn't miss it for the world," his aunts wrote. "So proud of you both," his cousins added. My coworkers RSVP'd with excitement. But from my side, silence. No calls from my mother, no text from my stepdad, no reply from Lauren, though I knew she'd seen the invitation. One morning, my phone buzzed with a message from an old family friend. "Sorry, Sarah, but we've already committed to Lauren's wedding. Hope you understand." Understand. The word made my stomach twist. Of course they'd go to hers. It was flashier, louder, bigger. People love a show. When I told George, his jaw tightened. "Then let them. If they can't see your worth, they don't deserve a seat at your table." I wanted to agree. But deep down, a part of me still longed for just one sign that my family cared enough to choose me, even once. Lauren, meanwhile, made sure I knew how her planning was going. She posted photos of dress fittings, tasting menus, floral arrangements taller than I was. Her captions dripped with condescension. "Can't wait for our big day. Nothing but the best for us." Every picture felt like a taunt. Every post was a reminder. She wasn't just competing, she was daring me to fail. One night, unable to sleep, I scrolled through her feed until George caught me. He gently took the phone from my hand. "Stop torturing yourself." "I can't help it," I whispered. "She's trying to crush me before the day even comes." He kissed my forehead. "Let her try. Because when the music starts and you walk down that aisle, no one will even remember she exists." I clung to his words, but unease still lingered like a shadow. 2 weeks before the wedding, I overheard something that made my blood run cold. At work, a colleague mentioned she had been invited to Lauren's event. "But honestly," she whispered to another coworker, not realizing I was nearby, People are saying her fiancé William is a little shady, bragging about connections he doesn't have. Some are second-guessing going. My heart pounded. Could it be true? Could Lauren's picture-perfect facade already be cracking? That night, I told George. He frowned. Even if her wedding falls apart, don't count on her letting go of you. If anything, she'll fight harder. She's not just after a perfect wedding, she's after you. She wants to prove you'll always be beneath her. His words sent a chill through me, because deep down, I knew he was right. Lauren didn't care about the marriage. She cared about winning, about making sure I stayed small. And so, I prepared myself, not just for vows and flowers, but for battle. I rehearsed what I would say if she showed up at my wedding. I imagined her walking through those barn doors in her smug perfection, and I swore to myself that this time I would not shrink. The night before, as fairy lights flickered across the barn and final touches were put in place, George and I stood together in the empty aisle. The scent of fresh-cut flowers filled the air. He took my hands, squeezing gently. Tomorrow, Sarah, everything changes. This is your story now, not hers. I nodded, heart pounding, but even as his words wrapped around me like armor, a whisper curled through my chest. Because I knew Lauren. And I knew if there was a way to steal my day, she would find it. The morning of my wedding dawned bright and golden, the kind of day that felt like a blessing. Sunlight streamed through the barn's wide doors, glinting off the strings of fairy lights that twinkled like stars, even in daylight. Friends bustled around me, pinning flowers to tablecloths, arranging last-minute decorations. George's cousins laughed as they stacked crates of wildflowers by the entrance, filling the air with color and fragrance. I stood in front of the mirror, my dress cascading in soft ivory folds, my hands trembling as I adjusted the veil. For a moment I couldn't breathe. This was it, the day I had dreamed of, the day I had fought for. Yet somewhere beneath the joy was a knot of fear, whispering Lauren's name. George found me before the ceremony. He knocked softly on the dressing room door and peeked in, his smile wide, his eyes warm. "Ready, my love?" I laughed shakily. "Ask me after I walk down that aisle." He kissed my forehead, steadying me. "You're going to be breathtaking, and no one can take this from you." His words steadied me as I stepped into the barn. Gasps rose from the crowd, not out of shock, but awe. The place was full, every chair taken, every face smiling. Friends from work, George's extended family, even clients I had impressed over the years. Applause erupted as the music swelled, and I walked toward George, his eyes locked on mine, tears shimmering in his gaze. The ceremony unfolded like a dream. His vows made me laugh and cry all at once, his voice breaking just enough to make the room feel intimate, sacred. When it was my turn, my voice shook, but the words poured out, my promise to love him, to never let the shadows of the past dim what we were building together. By the time the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, the barn erupted in cheers. George kissed me, and for a moment, it felt like the universe had rewritten my story. The reception burst into life with music and dancing. A local band, friends of George's dad, filled the air with Southern charm. Guests piled plates with barbecue and fresh bread, laughter echoing off the rafters. For the first time in years, I felt surrounded by love, by people who chose to be there. And then the doors opened. Silence rippled through the crowd. Lauren walked in, wearing her wedding dress. White satin, bejeweled bodice, veil trailing behind her like a declaration of war. On her arm was William, looking smug but uncertain, scanning the crowd. My parents followed, my mother plastering on a smile, my stepdad adjusting his tie as if they owned the place. My heart hammered in my chest. George squeezed my hand, grounding me. "Do you want me to have them removed?" he whispered. "No," I said, my voice low but steady. "Not yet." I walked across the dance floor, the crowd parting in hushed shock. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice ringing louder than I intended. Lauren smirked, tossing her curls. "Heard your little reception was happening. Had to see it for myself. Thought it might be cute." William scanned the barn, his smirk faltering as he realized just how full it was. "This is bigger than I thought," he muttered under his breath. George's father stepped forward then, his presence commanding. "Funny seeing you here," he said coolly. William's face paled. "Mr. Lewis, why are you here?" George's father raised an eyebrow. "It's my son's wedding. Where else would I be? Unlike some folks, I show up for family." The words landed like thunder. Guests shifted, whispers buzzing. William stammered, I didn't know. I mean, Lauren picked the date. Lauren's eyes widened. Don't you dare throw me under the bus. You were the one who thought it'd be hilarious to overshadow her. Their argument ignited right there in front of everyone. You said she was pathetic, William snapped. And you said this would make us look powerful, Lauren shot back, her face flushed, her voice rising to a shriek. The crowd gasped, some guests covering their mouths, others openly staring. A few even laughed quietly at the spectacle. I felt my parents inching toward me, desperation written on their faces. My mother forced a smile. Sarah, we always knew you were the reliable one, she said, as though those words could erase years of neglect. I looked her in the eye, my voice steady, my heart pounding. Save it. You're not welcome here. Her smile cracked. My stepdad shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward the exit. For the first time, they looked small, like people who had finally lost control of their narrative. George nodded subtly to the venue staff, who stepped forward with firm politeness. We'll show you out. Lauren shrieked as William tried to drag her toward the door, still snapping at each other. My parents followed quickly, my mother's face red, my stepdad muttering under his breath. The doors closed behind them, and a beat of silence hung in the air. Then George lifted my hand, kissed it, and the crowd erupted in cheers louder than before. The band struck up again, music roaring to life. Guests clapped, laughed, and danced harder, as if determined to drown out the chaos that had just stormed through. George pulled me into his arms, spinning me on the dance floor, his laughter in my ear. See, he whispered, they can't touch this. I pressed my forehead against his, tears spilling down my cheeks, not from pain, but from release. For the first time, I felt free. The night blazed on, brighter than ever. But in the back of my mind, one truth lingered. Lauren's attempt to steal my day had backfired spectacularly, and though she had walked out humiliated, her downfall was only beginning. The morning after the wedding, sunlight streamed through the curtains of our little apartment. My dress hung crumpled over a chair, shoes kicked into the corner, flowers scattered across the counter. My body ached from dancing, but my heart was light in a way it had never been before. George stirred beside me, kissed my hair, and whispered, "Wife." I laughed into his chest, "Husband." The night before replayed in my mind. The vows, the laughter, the way Lauren had stormed out in her wedding dress like a bitter queen stripped of her crown. For years, I had dreamed of standing taller than her, of finally proving I was more than the invisible daughter. But as I lay there, wrapped in George's arms, I realized it wasn't about her at all. It was about me. About finding a place where I was enough without needing anyone else's approval. Still, the fallout came quickly. By Monday, whispers had spread across Atlanta's circles. Lauren's wedding, the one she had painted as a glittering spectacle, was a disaster. Half the seats were empty because so many of William's business contacts had chosen to attend ours instead, loyal to George's father. The carefully planned glamour crumbled into chaos, with guests muttering about the awkward tension, the forced smiles, the way Lauren's voice carried when she snapped at William in the middle of the dance floor. Worse, William's reputation took a hit. The night at my reception had revealed him for what he was, small, insecure, desperate to climb on the shoulders of others. His bragging about deals he never made caught up with him. Within weeks, he lost a promotion he'd been chasing. His company no longer saw him as polished, but reckless. As for Lauren, her perfect image cracked. Social media buzzed with photos of her storming out of my barn, her dress dragging through the dirt, her face twisted in fury. People laughed. Sponsors pulled back. Her carefully curated brand, built on the illusion of control, began to unravel. I should have felt triumphant. For so long, I had craved this moment, the day when her cruelty would catch up to her. And yet, when the calls started trickling in, it wasn't triumph I felt. First, my mother. Her voice was unusually soft. "Sarah, can we talk?" I hesitated, the phone hot against my ear. "What is it?" "We didn't know. Lauren's wedding would fall apart like that. We should have been there for you." Anger flared sharp and sudden. "You had a choice, and you chose her, again." "Sarah, please," she whispered. "You're the reliable one. We need you." That word, reliable, cut deeper than any insult. It wasn't love, it was utility. It was a plea for me to clean up the mess they had made. I steadied my voice. Not anymore. I'm not your fallback. I'm not your shadow. I'm done. And for the first time, I hung up on her. My stepdad tried once too, his voice gruff, defensive. You don't understand, Sarah. We invested so much in Lauren. You thought wrong, I said, cutting him off. You chose her every time, and now you're paying the price. Don't call me again. The silence afterward was deafening, but freeing. George and I left for our honeymoon a week later, driving down to the Georgia coast. The ocean stretched wide and endless, gulls wheeling overhead, waves crashing against the sand. We walked barefoot at dawn, shrimp and grits warming our hands, laughter rising like a balm after years of heaviness. One evening, sitting by the shore, George looked at me with quiet intensity. You know, you don't have to carry them anymore. Their choices don't define you. I stared at the horizon, tears stinging my eyes. I know, but it's hard to unlearn a lifetime of being invisible. He took my hand, pressing it to his chest. Then let me remind you every day, you're not invisible. You never were. You're my whole world, Sarah. The waves roared and something inside me finally loosened. When we returned to Atlanta, our little home felt transformed. The walls seemed warmer, the rooms brighter. I began decorating, turning it into the kind of space I'd always longed for. Shelves lined with books, cozy blankets draped over the couch, flowers in jars on the kitchen table. It was small, imperfect, but it was ours. Every day, I woke up beside George, surrounded by love that didn't have to be earned or begged for, and slowly, the ache of the past began to fade. Not disappear, because scars don't vanish overnight, but soften. Sometimes I still thought of Lauren, of how she must have stared at the empty seats at her wedding, realizing her perfect world was crumbling. I thought of my parents, humiliated, turning their blame on her instead of facing their own failures. But those thoughts didn't consume me anymore. They were simply echoes. Because I had stepped out of the shadows. I had built a life where I was seen, loved, chosen, not by accident, not because of duty, but because of who I truly was. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Family isn't defined by blood or by the people who share your last name. Family is built by those who choose you, who show up for you, who see your worth even when you can't. For the first time in my life, I had that, and I wasn't about to let it go. So if you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever wondered whether you'll ever be enough, hear me now. You are. You always were. Don't let anyone steal your light. Build your own family, your own story, your own life. Because freedom isn't just walking away from those who hurt you. It's stepping fully into the love that was waiting for you all along. And on that barn floor, under those fairy lights, with George's hand in mine, that's exactly what I did.